For those of us who've lived and worked in Malaysia and watched Malaysia for a very long time, the past year has presented a rather alarming spectacle. Just to sort of set the stage, in many ways the crisis, if we can call it that, stemmed from a close call at the 2013 election, when the ruling UMNO party almost lost the popular vote, and some people would argue did lose the popular vote in the Malayan Peninsula. This then forced Malaysia's Prime Minister, Najib Tun Razak, to look for ways to stem the flagging support for the ruling party. This, in turn, led to a complete reversal of the whole sort of reform agenda. And instead of reform, Najib proposed ways to prop up support for the party, which led to the resort to sort of fairly desperate measures in terms of funding and, even worse, to growing signs of religious and ethnic intolerance. This then leaves us with, I think, three questions for our panel today. One is the extent to which this pattern of religious and ethnic intolerance is a growing concern, not just for Malaysia, but for all of us in the neighborhood. Two, the unanswered questions about Prime Minister Najib's fundraising efforts. I use that term loosely. And thirdly, and perhaps something that isn't so discussed so openly in the media, the stresses and strains that all this has put not just on the cohesion of Malaysian society, but on the integrity of the Federation. Now, I'm very pleased that today Wan Saiful is going to talk about the mainstream political issues, but we also have Professor Arya from Sarawak, who's going to bring in, I think, the very important dimension of East Malaysia. But we'll start with the peninsula and Malaysia writ large. Nice.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this event. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm really glad to be here as well. I'm going to be very quick. There's a big screen there telling that I only have 12 minutes. It's still green now. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't go into red before I finish. The full discussion of the ideas I have in my head is actually in the publication that's been distributed by the organizers. So I'm not going to go into too much details in there, but I'm going to summarize by saying that even the title of the session is actually making a point, which is we are a polity in distress, I think, as a country. And if we look at the what's been happening over the last few years in Malaysia, I think Najib started off great. He started off with a new vision for the country. He promoted two big ideas, one on the socio-political side, another one on the economic side. On the socio-political side, there's this idea of one Malaysia, which is supposed to be driving Malaysia away from the rampant ethnic-based politics that we have either enjoyed or suffered from for quite a long time. And on the other hand, there is also the new economic model, which I'm really excited about, because it does set the scene for Malaysia to be an economy that's more liberalized, where the private sector drives the economy moving forward. So there's two ideas, there's two big concepts that he was promoting at the beginning of his premiership, I think were really great. But the excitement that we had was really short-lived. Because if you look at how Najib has done over the last few years, especially in the last 1 or 2 years, you can see that there's two concepts, one Malaysia and the new economic model, is gradually being forgotten even by he himself. And I think the biggest problem faced by Najib over the years is in the excitement to reform the country, he forgot that he needed to take the party with him first. So what happened was he really promoted the reforms that the country had to undergo in order to move forward. But he forgot that he should have convinced his own party first before taking it to the country. So we had a situation where, since the first day he promoted all this reform, this liberalization agenda, the real fight has always been between Najib and UMNO. And I think he lost that war between himself and the party. And that is why, unfortunately, now we see that the ethno-nationalist within UMNO has won the day. I think the ethno-nationalist within UMNO has dominated the conversation and managed to really push Najib to change from someone who's quite progressive and reformist in his thinking. I still think that he, as a person, is the right one with the right vision to lead the country forward. But unfortunately, the party has pushed him to become almost, to try to be a bit more diplomatic, maybe, he's parroting what the ethno-nationalists in the party wants him to say. I think the reformist agenda that he came up with in the earlier time of his premiership is now forgotten. I think he is now in office, but not necessarily with the power needed in order to reform the country. So more in office, but not really in power. That might be in contrast to what some of you have in mind, and I've been talking to quite a few people throughout the day, and many have been arguing that actually he is concentrating power in himself. Now, there are two reasons why you would concentrate power, I think. Number one, if you really feel that you have something that needs to be done, and that can only be done when you have the actual power. But I think that's not the case with Malaysia at the moment. I think the concentrating of power into the hands of the Prime Minister is being done out of fear of what would happen if he does not have that power. And I say that with great sadness, really, and I really hope that I'm wrong in my predictions and in my assessment, but because I do feel that he does have the right vision. And I started off in the earlier time of his premiership. I must say that I was really out there saying that he has the right vision for the country and he deserves the chance and the support from us. I think Malaysia now, and I'm going to conclude by saying this, I think Malaysia now is at a crossroad. If we decide in a certain way, we may become a country that has lost all the key institutions that are needed in order to make the country one of the developed countries in the world. If you like, the comparison that has always been given is we're becoming like Zimbabwe, where the key institutions are gone and power is really concentrated into the hands of one person. That's if I'm not saying that we are like that now. What I'm saying is if we take certain decisions, that could be the path that we will be heading towards, becoming like Zimbabwe. And there is also another path where if we take a certain set of decisions, maybe what will happen to Malaysia is not quite like Zimbabwe, but we could be economically prosperous in the sense that Najib will remain in power, in the sense that there will be stability, there will be political stability in the country, and that could attract investments into the country, driving the economic growth moving forward. But the side effect to that is there might be almost zero political freedom, almost zero civil liberties. I'm not going to name an example of a country that has that. It's quite risky to do that, but we have two possible models that we could become, depending on how we move forward from here. But the situation, either way, I think is really looking quite bleak with the current situation. The opposition is in a shambles. They made some very important progress just recently with the pact that they signed to strengthen the relationship between the three political parties in Pakatan Harapan. But the fact is, one of the bigger opposition parties, which is PAS, the Islamic Party of Malaysia, is not in that pack. And that creates a lot of questions about this, the future of the opposition pack. So with that situation, I think the future is looking very uncertain. And I must say, I'm going to end with that, and I must say that is a very disappointing statement for me as a Malaysian to make, especially as someone who looked at the earlier years of Najib's premiership with such optimism. Thank you very much.
Before turning to Professor Arya, I'd just like, Saiful, to raise a couple of questions on your presentation, if I may. First of all, you mentioned PAS, but there's been a lot of talk. I mean, if we think that UMNO is in a fix because on the one hand it's gone down the ethno-nationalist route, on the other hand it's searching for more support and more leadership. More support they might be able to get from PAS. What are the chances of PAS actually doing what it did many decades before and actually joining UMNO in that? And secondly, if there's a leadership deficit in UMNO, why don't they just simply go out and find a new leader? And, you know, I mean, some people have proposed to me that it's speculated that it might even be worth trying to get Anwar Ibrahim back on side.
Yeah. I think that's likely going to remain as a proposal. Let's address the second one first. Why doesn't UMNO just look for a new leader? You see, looking at UMNO today, you really wonder what has happened to them. Because, you know, if I run a small organization, if I were to receive just, you know, whatever amount of money, you know, I raise money as well, not as skillfully as someone else does in the country.
You don't have a donor.
Yeah, I'm really trying to find out who this donor is. You know, I should write a letter to him. But if I were to receive an amount of money into my personal bank account, I would lose my job almost immediately. But we have a situation where a major political party running the country is not asking the right questions that they should ask. It is as if they have been, you know, the word that came to my head is castrated, but I really should not say that. But you know, that is the situation that we are in now. So I think this is a situation where Najib has his grips on power.
Is it money?
It's patronage.
Money?
Possibly with power as well, with allocation of positions.
Sedition Acts?
And use of the various different laws, you know, but even I am thinking whether I should be saying certain things or not.
It's okay, we're in Singapore.
Well,
No guarantee, no guarantee.
yeah, you're really putting me into trouble here. So that's the situation we're in. And at the same time, if you look at the current lineup in UMNO, people are saying that the potential replacement could be worse than the existing person. And we are in a bind, and I think UMNO knows that. But having said that, I think we need to look at what happens to UMNO as a party closer to the next general election, because I don't think there is a guarantee that a change will not happen at that time. So a deal might be struck somewhere.
And PAS?
And the issue of PAS, whether they will work with UMNO or not, I don't think they will join forces. They will not merge with UMNO. They will remain as a separate entity. They might work together on certain issues, and it is also quite possible. It is not impossible to imagine a situation where a deal is struck at the federal level, where PAS supports UMNO's agenda, certain UMNO agendas at the federal level, and UMNO allows them to rule Kelantan and do what they want in that state. You know, so that's the delegation of responsibilities, if you like. That is possible. But a formal merger of the two parties, I think, will not happen. I'm doubtful whether PAS will join Barisan Nasional either as well. I think, you know, it'll be a different sort of coalition, if you like.
Thank you. We'll come back to some of those issues after we've heard from Professor Arya, who introduces, I think, a very interesting and very important dimension to the whole discussion in Malaysia, which is what happens in the eastern part of Malaysia. I have myself noticed in the last few years, in the last 2 or 3 years, a sort of definite increase in the activism of East Malaysians, not just in East Malaysia itself, but also wanting to be more recognized on the peninsula. And so I think it's very important and very interesting that you've been able to sort of bring this discussion here today. So over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson Michael. First, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to this forum. I'm really pleased. I'm very happy to be here to share my views on Sabah and Sarawak, a polity under stress. Let me begin by saying that Sabah and Sarawak have long been neglected when we talk about Malaysia. Whenever we speak about Malaysia, we often think of the peninsula. And if you're from Kuala Lumpur, you only think of Kuala Lumpur. Yeah? You forget that the rest of the country exists. So it's a geographically different region. It's across the water. It has different histories. They have different powers politically. Simply, they have more autonomy because of the merger in 1963. Sabah Sarawak have a different skill and resource base. They have different development trajectories. And given the ethnic religious makeup, it is much more multicultural than the peninsula. The peninsula is generally dominated by Malay Muslim rhetoric and politics of the at this current time. This is not the case in Sabah and Sarawak. The similarities, however, and this is important, after 50 years of nation building, is poverty and inequality exists, and it is getting worse. Low wages persist, and they are lower than the peninsula. There is a large migrant labor population in Sabah and Sarawak growing. There is rising living costs. The inefficient and incompetent state institutions exist also. And education standards are dropping. So those are the similarities and differences. One significant similarity is that after 50 years of merger, the political culture has been sort of pressured to begin to look, to begin to accommodate, to begin to morph into something that is like what exists on the peninsula. So you have more parties, political parties that were multi-ethnic have become very communal. They identify with one ethnic group. There is a lot of patron clientelism. Developmentalism is a key component of politics in the state. Now, what does this say about the state of the Barisan Nasional state administrations, yeah? The condition of the state administrations in Sabah and Sarawak? Unlike the peninsula, they are rather cohesive, yeah? Strange as it sounds. Policy-wise, they're very aligned to Kuala Lumpur. And, mind you, they are very supportive of the Prime Minister. Yeah? You have occasional fractures. You have political parties splitting in Sarawak. You have sort of political fisticuffs in Sabah. But by and large, these are storms in teacups, especially when you compare to Prime Minister Najib's difficulties over 1 MDB. Yeah? So that's the scenario. What then is the implication of UMNO's weakness in Sabah and Sarawak? Now, Sabah, yeah? Sabah, as you know, one of the vice presidents of UMNO, Shafi Abdal, took a position together with the then Deputy Prime Minister, and of course got sacked from the cabinet. So the situation in Sabah is that it is now fractured, but fractured within UMNO in Sabah, but not necessarily fractured at the state government level. However, this fracture is not irreversible. It can be repaired because Shafi Abdal cannot and will not and dares not act on his own. He will only act in concert with perhaps Muhyiddin Yassin and people from the peninsula. And if Muhyiddin does not display any moves, or if he doesn't make any moves against Prime Minister Najib in the next 2 or 3 years, given the weak position of Prime Minister Najib, then we can expect that Sabah will remain calm. Yeah? Sabah will not boil over. But if Muhyiddin decides to act, then we will see some sparks in Sabah. Because Sabahans, they are rather nationalistic. They take strident positions. They are much more assertive than the Sarawakian politicians, and they have challenged Kuala Lumpur previously, as under PBS with Joseph Pyrene and all that. Yeah, so they have experience, they have a history of challenging, as opposed to Sarawak. Whatever the case, with or without UMNO, Sabah has underlying issues, some very key non-addressed issues. One issue is the porousness of the borders. And of course, Kuala Lumpur finally came up with this ESCOM, the Eastern Sabah Seaboard Zone, yeah? Security zone, where they tried to sort of control the movement of people across the border. The point is this: how do you protect a border against enemies when the reality is that the enemy is already within? And this is a much more difficult struggle than just protecting your borders. You can't build a wall. Yeah? And in a sense, it's really the case of the Project IC, the issues, the implications of Project IC coming home to roost. We've got thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of foreign-born citizens in Sabah. Yeah? And the irony is that local politicians in Sabah use them, rely on them as a vote bank. So this then has fueled anger in Sabah, and that has fueled this whole drive to autonomy and secession. Sabahans even speak openly about what's the use of having immigration controls in Kota Kinabalu when they're all just coming in through the back door. We might as well just forget it. Yeah, so you have that situation. In Sabah, they have this Sabah Keluar Malaysia movement. In Sarawak, you also have, since 2008, greater demands for autonomy. And there in Sarawak, you have the Sarawak for Sarawakian movement, and you have DAP, the Opposition Democratic Action Party, PKR, also jumping onto the bandwagon. To be fair to Chief Minister Adenan, he has been forced to respond, yeah? And he has responded with flair. He bluntly called Putrajaya's education policy stupid. He has bluntly said that intolerant Islam or extremists from the peninsula are unwelcome. Religious bigots, racial bigots will be stopped at the border. He even went so far as to say the Sarawak Barisan Nasional will reconsider its loyalty to Prime Minister Najib if the Prime Minister is found guilty in this 1MDB case. But of course, you and I know that's not going to happen, because there's the whole problem of inefficient, or shall I say incompetent, and I'm being kind here, in state institutions when it comes to powerful politicians. So this has been vintage Adenan. Yeah? He has spoken out against timber corruption, bureaucratic inefficiency. He has pushed for the greater use of English. He has abolished road tolls, bridge tolls, ferry fees. He's even put dams beloved of his unloved predecessor on hold. So what he has done is that he has neutralized the opposition. He has neutralized the movements for autonomy, greater autonomy, by taking on those issues. And he has ironically emerged as the new champion of autonomy in East Malaysia. Yeah? He's seen as anti-UMNO. He's made videos. They're available online, speaking out against the fact I will still not allow UMNO to come in, yeah? And he has taken anti-Putrajaya positions. He enjoys 75% approval ratings in Sarawak. Eat your heart out. All those who believe in ratings, he's got 75%. Yet, at the same time, he has condemned secession talk. He has vowed no secession. It's now Malaysia, now and forever. Similarly, Musa Aman, the Chief Minister of Sabah, has condemned secession. And Najib, Prime Minister Najib, has called secessionists stupid. The federal government has deregistered associations pushing for secession. It has charged people for sedition, for advocating secession and autonomy, and their arrest warrants up. So what is Adnan's and Musa's game? And the game is, this is an elite play. I say it's an elite play because I'll come back to the issues of cost of living and all that later. It's an elite play where the Sabah and Sarawakian politicians are demanding a transfer of greater resources from the federal government to their administrations. And why not? After all, both Sabah and Sarawak Barisan Nasional saved the federal Barisan Nasional not once, but twice. In 2008, they saved the federal Barisan Nasional government, and they were so surprised they didn't know what to do. So they're quite stumped. Now, what do we do? This is a situation we're not normally in. But they saved the federal Barisan Nasional in 2013, and this time they decided, hey, we are going to extract our pound of flesh. So they're going to extract concessions, and they have demanded those concessions, whether it's in terms of more autonomy in decision-making, in terms of political power, exercise of political power, in terms of fund transfers. However, and I must rush quickly now, Adnan is of the old guard. The new guard is not so assertive as the old guard. The new guard have a different vision of Malaysia. Adnan is of the generation of Abdul Taib Mahmud, the former chief minister. Yeah? So there is some concern. If you expect greater autonomy, it might happen for a while, but then I think this is more like a shift in power, a temporary shift in power. Two last points. Will the Barisan Nasional win again in the next state election due by June next year in Sarawak? Will they win again? Yes, they will. And they will win well, yeah, in Sarawak. Why? Because two major factors. One, at the macro level, many Malays, many Bumiputras in Sarawak rely on the Barisan Nasional, have depended on the Barisan Nasional. They feel a sense of entitlement for all development in the state. Many also have a subsidy mentality, sadly but true. And so when you talk about the Barisan Nasional losing power, there's this real fear in their hearts as to why should I change? If I change, I'm going to lose all these benefits. And they're real. Secondly, and this is the nitty-gritty reasons, the opposition in both Sabah and Sarawak are disorganized, they're in disarray, they're always squabbling among themselves, they have very poor quality members. And this is not to talk about the fact that the constituencies have been gerrymandered, they're malapportioned, yeah, but that's part of politics, I guess. So the issues also, and I think this is where the political opposition in Sabah and Sarawak need to stop and think. The issues that they raise are very important issues like corruption, autonomy, yeah, more democracy. But it means nothing to the poor person in the rural area. To the poor person in the rural area, it is bread and butter. To someone who cannot even earn, a family that cannot even earn 800 ringgit a month, corruption, 1MDB, Anwar Ibrahim, more democracy means nothing. I need to put food on the table for my 4, 5, 6 children. Yeah, so for them, it is wages, rising cost of living, GST, the TPPA, unemployment, yeah, housing prices, debts. These are the issues that concern them. So in that sense, there's a great fear of change. At the moment, I can access resources through the Barisan Nasional. The political opposition is so weak, they don't even give me a vision I can look forward to. Why should I change ships? So on that note, I'll stop and we'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to, before opening the floor, I'd like to sort of push you both on a couple of issues. And the first is on unity. I mean, I think, Professor, you've made it clear that you don't feel that there is a real threat to the unity of the Federation from East Malaysia. But nonetheless, you've made the point that they have a high degree of leverage in the current political context. And there is presumably room for tempers to flare, for politicians to make rhetorical stands that could, in fact, begin to unpick the ties that bind the Federation. So I'm just wondering, my question to you would be, would it be more prudent for the federal government to actually make these concessions now on the question of resources and not allow the situation to become worse? And for you, Wan Saiful, you know, on the question of unity, that we've discussed the Federation, we've discussed Semenanjung, the Peninsula Malaysia and East Malaysia, but we haven't discussed Johor, which is the third component of the country. Politically, in a sense, because it stands out politically. And what we've seen is the activism of the Sultan. There was a very interesting interview in the Straits Times over the Christmas period, where he made it very, very clear that he will guard and he will protect and defend his rights as Sultan to assert himself on questions of religion, and also we've heard it before, but he trotted out the point that UMNO was in fact established in the palace, and I think that was a very clear message in terms of the influence that he and his son would like to have on the political direction. So what do you think about, Professor, the question of unity in terms of the Federation, and also, Saiful, do we see a slight unpicking of things on the peninsula itself?
Thanks, Michael. The price of oil has collapsed. There's less resources available for development and for spreading around in Malaysia. And coming at a time when there are greater demands from Sabah and Sarawak for these resources, I think the federal government is going to come under serious pressure. I think the Deputy State Secretary of Sarawak has initiated, at least from what I know, they have begun to initiate discussions with Kuala Lumpur over the transfer, at least, of autonomy. I think the Prime Minister has also agreed. He says, yes, we will discuss greater issues of autonomy. The question is whether these discussions can be sealed over the next 3 years or not. But certainly there will be challenges with regard to resource allocation, and that will cause strain. That will certainly cause strain in the relationship, because the elites of Sarawak and Sabah have, I think, valid claims for greater transfer of resources. And if they cannot make this move now, then suddenly there will be no other chance for them to make this move. Also, to be fair to Kuala Lumpur, I think, will try its best to make those transfers, but within the context of the original agreements that they've had with Sabah and Sarawak. And I'm not talking about the 18 points, I'm not talking about the 20 points, I'm talking about the fact that Kuala Lumpur, as long as Sabah and Sarawak play ball with Kuala Lumpur, as long as Sabah and Sarawak preserve the union, as long as Sabah and Sarawak allow for the extraction of some resources from Sabah and Sarawak, and allow for Muslim Bumiputra domination of the politics in Sarawak, I think there is some realistic understanding that resources will be transferred. The irony is that the Barisan Nasional for all purposes has ceased to exist in the peninsula. It's really UMNO that's governing and pulling along the Chinese and Indian and the other parties. But in Sabah and Sarawak, it's actually a question of power sharing. And I think in that spirit, transfers of resources will happen. And I actually think the Federation will hold.
Okay.
royal activism. You're asking me, some serious questions you're asking me here. And I still want to go back to Malaysia and do whatever I can still. So let's put it this way. I think that the reality is, in Malaysia, we have been independent not even for 60 years yet. And but we are still going through all the various processes of becoming a more mature constitutional democracy, constitutional monarchy. But at the same time, we have come to a stage where when political leadership was necessary, political leadership was also absent, or is also absent. And at that time, you see that society immediately is looking for someone to fill in that role. And that's why it's not only the case of the Sultan of Johor, it is also the case where, as soon as someone says something sensible, immediately people will rally behind them. And you see the likes of the younger brother of the Prime Minister, Dato' Sri Nazir Razak. When he says things that resonate with the public, immediately people are pushing for him to set up a new political party, set up a new NGO, run for office and so on. I think it is a sign that we are searching for that potential leadership. And there are times when existing individuals, including the Sultan of Johor, has jumped into that picture and provided the leadership that people were looking for. It does raise a few questions, especially about the concept of constitutional monarchy. I think this is an issue that needs to be discussed, and it needs to be debated in a mature way. But unfortunately, at the same time, we live in a situation where everything is turned into an emotional debate, to the extent that issues that need to be debated in a rational way cannot be debated in a rational way. So, if you were to raise the issue of constitutional monarchy and whether or not the Sultan should speak in certain policy matters, the likelihood is people will not listen to what you say. They will focus on the fact that you have said it, and you are challenging. It will be portrayed as if you're challenging the right of the Sultan to say something, and that could be dangerous to whoever is making that comment, which is why I'm not going to make the comment.
I read it in the Straits Times. So, the floor is open. Take some questions. It's a big room, so forgive me if I don't see you. Who wants to ask a question? Yep, sorry. Okay.
Hi, I'm Meredith Weiss from State University of New York. Thanks for your presentations. Following on your response regarding the sultans just now, Wan Saiful, but actually for either of you, there's been so much discussion of late of people really looking to the sultans as the saviors of Malaysian democracy, which is itself a somewhat problematic position. But I'm wondering where else one might look for a check on the decline that you've both documented in so much of Malaysian politics, discourse, economics, and so forth recently. Do you see glimmers, for instance, in the civil service of a push toward greater probity? There seemed to be some moments when the 1MDB scandals first started breaking toward sort of dissent within the ranks of the bureaucracy, but it's not clear to me that that's continued. It seems as though just looking to the Prime Minister's brother, for instance, is not necessarily really an institutional remedy, but more a personalistic one, which I agree people rally behind these intelligent statements, but then there's not always depth to that rally. But where would we look for a bright spot or for an institutional possibility, an opening that might suggest that it's not all downhill from here, which seems to be the current trajectory? Sorry for the dismal question, but hopefully you can shed some brightness.
Saiful, why don't you start?
Yeah. Where do we look for these bright spots? I think there are there, especially on the civil society side. And I think that even the realm of civil society in Malaysia is in the process of maturing. We are still undergoing through a stage where civil society is more advocacy-based and quite rhetorical in some sense, and taking the activist role. But there is an increase in the level of intellectually driven civil society organizations, especially among the young. And to be frank with you, when we started off ideas just 6 years ago, people were saying, well, some of us, in fact me, were saying, do we really have a future in trying to set up a research-driven civil society organization and try to, talk in a language that is more acceptable to, not as aggressive as some, but still discussing those issues that are being discussed by others. I think this is growing in the Malaysian society, and I think that is a positive sign. There are also some politicians who are, beginning to show signs that they are listening to facts and figures. The challenge with Malaysia today is, and I guess this is a challenge to political parties and political movement everywhere, is as soon as you show that you are clever to an extent, the likelihood is there will be efforts to just chop you off from the picture. But luckily enough, there are some politicians in Malaysia who are showing signs that they're listening to all this, but they're working within a certain system. And unfortunately, that system is still there, and that is the system that we're working in. And as a result, even though privately they may say clever things, publicly they say not very clever things, because those are the things that make them win, unfortunately. But there are glimmers of hope. I see them somewhere out there over the rainbow. And I'm really hoping that there will be more of those lights. That's why the approach that we take at Ideas, for example, is we may disagree with many things that are, people who we say as on the other side are saying, but there must be certain things that we agree with them. So even the likes of the ethno-nationalists, I said just now in my presentation that the ethno-nationalists are driving the change and is moving the country towards the wrong direction. But still, even the ethno-nationalists, they are against corruption. Some of them are really trying their best to devise policies that will ensure that we don't become really badly corrupt countries. So we have been engaging with the likes of the Malay Economic Action Council, with the like of ISMA and Perkasa, and they are responding to all this. In fact, they are quite advanced in certain ways. So I think there are signs of hope out there. We just need to make sure that those lights, those actors, they are more rational and not as emotional in pushing for change. And I think if we can just bring this, dispersed lights together, that there will be some chance. But I also want to come back to the question that you asked just now about this unity of the federation, if I may comment just a little bit. I don't think what we're seeing is a weakening of the federation. I think what we're seeing is the strengthening of the federation by entities actually, by states actually calling for more powers to be devolved to them. Yeah. It might be a weakening of a centralized federation, but it is actually a strengthening of the concept of federation in the country.
Yeah, going back to the original spirit of the federation. Yes. I must say I salute your call there for consensus, because given what's happening in neighboring Thailand, where there is perpetual and chronic polarization, the one thing that you can do is try to forge a consensus. Professor Arya, did you want to comment? Or?
Not much to add to it, except to say that it's rather sad. I mean, I also fall into this dismal trap often when I think about Malaysia. Malaysia used to be a country that, small as it is, used to punch beyond its weight class. Yeah? Today, it's rather dismal. Politics in Malaysia is rather dismal. Where are the bright spots? The bright spots erupt often. You see them in, I actually believe there are bright spots in the universities, as long as they don't charge the university academics for sedition. The irony of it all, yeah? university lecturers or academics who speak up based on their expertise on topics of importance to the country get charged by their employer, that's the federal government, for sedition. We'll know more or less whether it applies outside the country or not in the coming weeks, yeah? Or whether the Malaysian law on sedition only applies in Malaysia. There are bright spots in the political parties. Sad we don't see it now, but in reality, I think there are bright spots. I think there are bright spots in the opposition, in the political opposition, the younger generation. I thought there was a bright spot around Saifuddin Abdullah, the former minister in UMNO, until he got throttled and pushed out of the party. So he's gone into the opposition. I think that's a bright spot. And if he can pull together the coalition and the younger people in Pakatan Rakyat, I think that's a very major bright spot. I think that the current leadership of the Pakatan Rakyat have failed. I think politics in the opposition has been too personalized, too feudal in terms of their outlook, too family-oriented, and that doesn't help. I think there is a need for more democratic principles and more openness to apply within the political opposition. I also think there's bright spots in the manufacturing economic sector. And I would love to see economic associations, chambers of commerce assert themselves in a more rigorous way than what they have currently done in Malaysia. I think there's so much expertise in the private sector in Malaysia, and I think if they can assert themselves, I think government will begin to listen. But
Wee Kee Beng, and then there's one more over there. But first, Wee Kee Beng.
Hi, Wee Kee Beng from ISIS, Yusof Ishak Institute. Wan Saiful, I appreciate your remark about Najib losing the battle to UMNO, as it were. My question is about the dynamics of Najib at the moment staying in office, if not in power. Now, there seems to be a lot of buying of loyalty. I think that was the main consensus about that happening at the UMNO and annual assembly. The thing about buying loyalty, of course, is that it does work, but then it costs a lot, and money ends somewhere or other, and so loyalty will dry up when the money runs out. Now, Najib has 4 years before the next election, and by all signs, he seems to have survived all the challenges. I'm just wondering about this challenge, the internal one. How will he be able to maintain loyalty through buying it up? At the same time also, I find it hard to believe that the whole of UMNO can be bought up that way. There must be forces in there that will not give in to this. I wouldn't mention any names, but the battle is not really over. So I wonder if you could comment on what will happen in the months ahead and perhaps the years ahead in how Najib can survive. Thank you.
So is patronage a bottomless pit?
Certainly not, but there are also positions that can be dished out, right? So it's not just about money, it's also about positions, and being a country where, you know, state-owned enterprises really dominate the economy, there's quite a lot of positions that can be dished out. At the same time, if there is dissent, you know, creatively enough, there is also this option of promoting dissenters, as has been done in the last reshuffle in July, where the Public Accounts Committee, people who are investigating a certain thing, maybe it's because they have been doing such a good job in the investigations, was promoted to deputy ministers and ministerial position. But you're right in saying that, you know, they cannot depend on money forever. But this is where I think we need to understand that there are people in UMNO who are UMNO members and UMNO leaders because they really believe in the cause, whatever that cause is. Generally speaking, let's just, you know, just for sake of argument, say that it is, if we can simplify it, make a very big generalization, it is about defending the rights of the Malays. That, let's say that is the core purpose of UMNO, but maybe it actually is. So there are people who actually believe in that cause. And to them, ensuring that UMNO stays in power is more important than ensuring who is the president of the party and whether or not that person stays in power. At the moment, the assessment, I think, is if you disrupt the system and push Najib out, then what you get is instability that will only destroy UMNO as an entity. So you might as well keep what you have now in order to ensure that there is possibility of winning in the next stage. So I don't think this is all about being loyal to Najib. I don't think this is about everybody has been bought out, bought off. It is, the reality is there are some people who might be benefiting, allegedly, I must add, dangerous time these days, allegedly has been bought off. But there are also many other people who are sincerely fighting for a cause. And when they do the assessment, maybe their judgment is, you might as well keep what you have now and ensure there is a smooth transition rather than instability.
And to make a fine distinction on that point, let's assume that you're right and that UMNO essentially wants to ensure that they remain in power. Does that also mean that they begin to turn a bit of a blind eye to some of these shocking allegations, that there's a tolerance of what the leadership will do in order to keep UMNO in power?
Yes, and that's what we see today. And I think this is exactly what's happening with the donation gate, if you like, to the extent that it can be tolerated and defended, not just tolerated, it's defended. So I think that is exactly what's happening. There is a bigger concern. So rather than doing something that will disrupt the dynamics, let's make sure that we don't fall into that bigger disaster that can happen while tolerating the weaknesses that we have now.
Which is a pity because going to that previous question, undermines the institutions. One last question over there.
Yeah, my question is on the...
Two more. We've got time for two more. Sorry, go.
The two major coalitions in the country, my question is on that. Both are somewhat in disarray. I mean, the National Front, you have MIC and MCA, at very low support level, just UMNO carrying on. On the other hand, you have the opposition coalition, the PAS has exited and another smaller splinter party has joined them. My question is, going forward the next elections, which of these coalitions will be able to get themselves fully in play and therefore, push forward to get the mandate of the people in terms of winning the elections? Which of these coalitions have a better chance and who's likely to lead them there?
Can we just take the last group of questions and then have you all respond to that? So, yes, you over there and then finally.
Racial relationship and harmony is a great concern in a multi-racial country like Malaysia. Now, in the light of the recent two incidents, a riot and another incident in the shopping mall, how do you assess the status of racial relationship, especially in West Malaysia? And do you think what can the authority do to improve the situation? Thank you.
Yes,
my name is Ho from Keppel Corporation.
I am Malcolm Cook from the Yusof Ishak Institute. I'm wondering, given the very gloomy views, and last year we had slightly more moderate but still gloomy views of Malaysia, is there an increase in emigration from Malaysia? And if there is it across all the major ethnic groups, or is it more communal in its increased exit from Malaysia, seeking a less gloomy life somewhere else, including right next door here? Thanks.
Thank you. Two good questions there. First one, which coalition likely to win? The second question which is an important issue on the strength and health of racial harmony. And the third question on, I suppose, leading on from that, whether there's immigration. So, Dr. Arya, why don't you start with the coalition question?
Yeah, thank you. It's a difficult question, which coalition will be able to get its act together. A week is a long time in politics. We've got 3 years to go before the next general election, and it will be that long. I don't see any general election happening anytime earlier in Malaysia. The Barisan Nasional has certainly got a head start. They also have the federal civil service to back them up. And let us not doubt the fact that there are some very talented people still in the federal civil service. And they can always call on the federal civil service to organize the elections or allegedly organize the elections for them. So unless the opposition, this new pact between PKR, DAP, and Amanah, unless they can begin to envision, it's not only a working relationship, it's really a vision that they have to come up with, a vision that everybody in that new coalition can share, a vision of a democratic society, a vision of a liberal society, a vision of a multi-ethnic, multicultural society, one that respects not only ethnicity and religion, but also regional divisions in Sabah and Sarawak. The imagination is not going to spark. Also, there is a real need to open the doors for the younger crowd within the opposition to come through. Yeah? Until that happens, I'm afraid the vision will not appear. So in the absence of a genuine vision, it's really going to be sort of stumbling or dismally proceeding as it has been for some time.
Yeah.
Which coalition has a better chance of winning? Looking at the current trajectory, I'm going to be very blunt here. Looking at the current trajectory, I think if nothing spectacular happens with the opposition coalition, we're probably going to see the ruling coalition, Barisan Nasional, continuing to win. But having said that, there are issues surrounding, especially Najib, as we just discussed just now, that could make him a liability in the next general election. So if he is one who leads in the next general election, and if the opposition coalition managed to get the acts together, I think there is actually quite a chance for the opposition coalition to win the election. Having said that, I think as someone who is not really, not at all involved in campaigning for public office and looking from the outside, looking from civil society angle, I think it is really important for people in civil society to make sure that whoever is in power, the institutions are strengthened. And I think that one of the weaknesses of civil society in Malaysia today is we tend to take sides. And once we have taken side, we really denigrate and attack the other side. And I think this is not really the ideal situation. If Pakatan were to win, I really do not want Barisan Nasional to collapse completely, because that means we will see another 50, 60 years of the same party being in power, which is a repeat of what we have seen so far. I want to see political competition happening. And that is why I think if we are looking at the two coalition parties, my answer is whoever wins, we need to ensure that both are strengthened and both are improved.
Thank you. We've sort of run out of time, but we'll overrun a little bit and address the important issue of racial harmony, which I think was a very good question, and then finally end on the immigration issue. Saiful, why don't you start on racial harmony and then...
Okay. The racial harmony one, we at Ideas last year, we ran a project called National Unity Youth Fellowship Program. So we invited a group of youth leaders, 20 of them. We selected them through a competitive process, and we took them around Malaysia to various different places, all the states, and met with community leaders. And I must say, as soon as you go out from the Kuala Lumpur bubble, you immediately realize that actually, at the grassroots level, people, as Andrew said just now, they want to live their life. They want to make sure there's bread and butter. Not quite bread and butter in the rural areas, but the food that they eat, the nasi and ikan goreng and so on. And they just want to live life as comfortable as they can. And the problem that we have is the most vocal part is, of course, those people in politics in Putrajaya and in Kuala Lumpur, including people like me. And we are the one who keep harping on and on about these issues to the extent that it does influence public opinion. I think to go to second part of the question, which is what can the authorities actually do, I think the authorities just leave us alone, and we should be okay. The dilemma is when people in power start saying, you should mix, and I do have questions in my mind whether that is actually the right way forward or not. Why can't people just choose to live the way they want to live, where they want to live, with whoever they want to live with? Why should the authorities start forcing people to come together? Because that might be the source of problems. But the state of racial relationship in the country at the moment is one in which, at the grassroots level, there is increased concern about the nature of the relationship and the quality of those relationships, but it is happening because there are people in political positions who are really worried about themselves, and therefore, in order to perpetuate their stay in office and their relevance in office, they must ensure that we are continuously divided along ethnic and political lines. And this is a worry. The immigration issue, I don't have the numbers, anecdotal stories, about saying that many people are becoming more interested to migrate out, but this is not the choice for everyone. It might be an elite few who get invited to work for places like ISIS and come to Singapore, and so on. But the reality is the vast majority of Malaysians do not have that choice. It's worrying as well, if those clever enough to hold important positions all move out, what will happen to the country? But I think the reality is, yes, there might be increased interest in moving out, but whether or not everyone has the chance to do that is a different story.
A final word, Professor, on racial harmony.
Thanks. The problem has become rather structural. It used to be less complicated. It was clear that it was a Malay-Chinese problem in the 1969, manipulated by political tensions, but now it's become rather structural. And when I say structural, we have an urban underclass and a rural underclass also of Bumiputra Malay youths who not only are unemployed, they are unemployable. And the manifestation of this underclass is this phenomenon called the rempit. For those of you who are familiar with this term, it's the motorcycle groups, the groupies, the bikies. And there is an intense sense of anger and dissatisfaction among this underclass. Many of them migrate to cities and then they become the urban underclass. And why? Because they cannot get work for the simple reason that one, of course, they have skills deficits. Two, there's this huge influx of migrant labor in Malaysia that is really undercutting Malaysian labor, Malaysian blue-collared work. So, and employers want them because it's a catch-22. These foreign workers, they work better, they're more disciplined than the Malaysians, and we can even pay them better in terms it's less wages and we make more profit. Whereas the local Malaysian blue-collar workers, they're not disciplined, they demand higher salaries. So it's become a real structural problem. And so there's this anger towards the foreign labor, which is manifested on a daily basis in the industrial estates. There is anger, palpable anger. The Chinese control certain sectors of the economy. In the case of the riot in Pudu, it was the case of controlling the handphone market. Just as the same way now there's a lot of Malay entrepreneurs who control the vape business in Malaysia. And so imagine the pressure being put on them. They go into a business where they invest their cash and then only to find that vaping is now banned. Yeah? So these tensions are playing out in ethnic configurations, and it doesn't help when you have ethnic politics and ethnic politicians who are more than happy to take advantage of this urban or even rural underclass of people. Emigration, I don't have the figures either. But I would agree with One Saiful that really, if you are rich and if you have the means, you will emigrate. If you go and check out the elite of Sabah and Sarawak, you will find that most, if not all of them, yeah, have second homes in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. They bank in Singapore, yeah. They bank in Australia, they shop in Hong Kong. So for these people, and that's the tragedy, the elites have the means to leave, and if they all leave, then the rats inherit the ship. Yeah, and that's the problem.
Terrible way to end it. But anyway, I'd like to thank you both for an excellent discussion, and I want to submit my humble apologies to the organizers for overrunning by a considerable amount of time. But I hope it was worth it, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I certainly did. Thank you.